We're launching rockets up in the air. Trump's in the Supreme Court. All that and more today on The Nathan Hale Show. Well, folks, here we are. We're back. We got a lot to cover, a lot to talk about, and I don't even know where we begin at. I guess we should go right off the bat and talk about what's been happening here in the country, in the world right now over the past couple weeks. Right, a lot's been going on, but the Supreme Court is currently hearing the birthright citizenship issue right now. And Trump made some history today. He actually was in the Supreme Court. He's the first president ever, the first ever sitting U.S. president to be in at the Supreme Court during oral arguments. So this whole birthright citizenship issue has been coming up a lot. It's been a big thing of the Trump 2.0 term, getting birthright citizenship overturned. This is the whole thing where you come into the country, as soon as you have a child here, they are a citizen. You might remember kind of back in 2016, the term anchor baby started floating around a lot. This was the idea that we had a lot of legal immigrants, illegal aliens coming here over our southern border into the country, popping their baby out when they get to the other side. And because their child is now a citizen, because they were born on the United States territory, ICE, Customs and Immigration Enforcement, will be a lot nicer to them because their child's a citizen. They won't want to break up the parents, so they might just kind of let the parents, being illegal aliens, kind of slide, and not really mess with them all much. That's where anchor baby came from, is the baby anchors the family to the United States. By the way, so birthright citizenship, it's in the 14th Amendment. This was a whole package of amendments that were passed after the Civil War happened. Basically, it was, you can go do your own digging, your own history for yourself, but essentially, it made it a lot easier for the United States to just kind of go about integrating all of these now freed black slaves into the greater American zeitgeist by just basically saying, hey, if you were born here on United States soil, you are a citizen here, right? We don't have to go through this whole process of trying to figure out who's actually a citizen, who's not. By the way, the United States is actually pretty rare for this. The United States, Canada, a few countries in South America, and a couple of countries over, I think maybe there's maybe one African country and maybe like one or two Middle Eastern countries. Basically, all of the crap countries in the world, other than the United States and Canada, let's be honest, it's kind of, it's going down that direction, it's looking like. Basically, no other country besides those has anything like birthright citizenship attached to it. So there's really no other country in the world where you can go and do these things. America, it really is the only one. We have a lot of issues here in the United States that are very United States oriented. A lot of other countries don't have to deal with it. Illegal immigration, for example, a lot of other countries have much stricter laws when it comes to immigrating to their country, when it comes to becoming a citizen of their country. The United States, we just kind of throw it around in the air like, oh, no big deal, right? Like, we're just make anyone a citizen. Voter ID, for example, a lot of other countries have very strict voting laws in their country. United States, not so much. We don't need voter ID, right? We don't need it here. Our elections are totally safe, blah, 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 where you have all these arguments, right? So needless to say, birthright citizenship is one of them. It's a very Amerocentric idea. I'm going to call it Amerocentric. I don't know if that's the right term or not, but we're coining it here today. Coining the Amerocentric idea. Or a U.S.-centric idea, I guess you could say. But I guess a little Amerocentric because, North America and South America, there's other countries that have it too. So, anyways, a lot of people have had a lot to say about how they feel about birthright citizenship. And I happen to be somewhat against it. I get it if both your parents, for example, are American citizens. I understand not wanting, to put your child, have to go through and fill out all this paperwork to make them a citizen. I understand if you're already a citizen here, having a child here, and them automatically receiving the citizenship. I get that. I even get it to an extent if you are actively in the process of becoming a citizen. Making it easier to just wave on through your child if you're actually in that process. The issue that we're seeing, though, is people taking advantage of that system, people coming over our border and having a baby here and then anchoring them to the country, or people having a baby and their baby's a citizen, but they for some reason don't have the investment in America to go and become a citizen. Right? We're hearing all these stories about these people, who were here for 25 years, 17 years, 12 years, 14 years, whatever it is, who have been here for a significant amount of time, who are still technically undocumented in the United States. You guys know I don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for that, because it's like, if you've been here for that long, why haven't you become a citizen at that time? Like, seriously? Like, I would want to go become a citizen of whatever country I was living in. I feel like a lot of you would feel the same way also. Like, I wouldn't want to remain undocumented there. Well, that's kind of beside the point. So I always enjoy reading what other people have to say about this whole issue. Because I like to know what everyone's thinking. I like to know what's going on in other people's heads. It gives me new ideas, ways to think about things, especially when it comes to kind of challenging ideas around the law. So I read this one Twitter post, and I'm going to kind of read it for you. And so this user wrote, I was thinking, I'm a U.S. citizen and visiting Japan, and what it means is that, if I steal someone's wallet in Japan, the Japanese authorities can arrest me and persecute me. So they're writing this to kind of defend birthright citizenship. So keep following. So it's allegiance, meaning they can control you as a matter of law. I can also rely on them if my wallet is stolen to go and prosecute the person who has stolen it. So there's this relationship. Even though I'm a temporary traveler on vacation in Japan, I'm still locally owing allegiance in that sense. Is that the right way to think about it? And if so, doesn't that explain why both temporary residents and undocumented people would have that kind of allegiance just by virtue of being in the United States? So this person basically wrote through this argument about why we need to keep this, and how essentially being a traveler, or just showing allegiance of some kind to a country that you're in, basically following the laws of that country, should constitute being a citizen. Now, I read this and I was like, this person really can't be serious. This is something really absurd. Like, I don't really understand exactly what they're arguing. I mean, is their argument that, like, anyone who's in a different country is basically a citizen of that country because they follow the laws of that country? Or that because the authorities of that country can execute the police power on you should you commit a crime in that country, that you're essentially a citizen of that country? I don't really know where this argument's coming from. I don't really understand how this is going through someone's head. And, folks, maybe you can say that I'm naive for not understanding the nuances of what this person is trying to say. But I really don't. I really feel like it's very shallow, very surface level. This person writing this might not even really know what they're saying either. So, I read this and I shared this with, several people who I know in my life. And I basically framed it in the same way that I did for you. And I followed up by saying, would it surprise any of you that the person who wrote this whole argument, talking about how going to Japan and being a traveler in Japan and showing allegiance to a country, all this, right? Would it surprise any of you to know this was not just some person on the internet. This was a sitting justice of the Supreme Court of the United States who wrote this. This is Ketanji Brown Jackson, folks. This woman right here, right. Where is she? Where's my hand at? Right. She's on the screen. I can't get my finger over there. It's mirrored for me, folks. You understand. But she's up there. She was the Biden-appointed Supreme Court nominee, the first ever black Supreme Court justice, folks, right? Really making such a great name for all the black women out there. I mean, honestly, Ketanji Brown Jackson, I've met so many amazing black women in my life. Ketanji Brown Jackson does such a disservice to all of them, right? By saying absolute BS like this. What the heck does this even mean, right? This is Supreme Court Justice. I just read this for you. If you hadn't heard this, folks, I genuinely want to know. If you hadn't heard about this story at all, this has kind of been a big thing on the internet recently, but if you hadn't heard about this, did your jaw just like drop when I said this is a Supreme Court justice? This is someone who's supposed to be on the forefront of legal knowledge in the United States. This is supposed to be one of the greatest legal scholars of American law in the country, who is on this panel of judges. And this is the BS coming out of her mouth. So, this has been going viral for good reason, right? And there have been several comments that have been made by a handful of different people. So Steve Guest commented, and he said that, quote, "I don't think KBJ knows what words mean." Andrew Clovet, Turning Point of Turning Point USA, he commented and said, "Leave it to Justice Jackson to defend the suicide pact of birthright citizenship for illegals by not understanding the difference between territorial jurisdiction, obeying local laws, and political allegiance." The great governor, Ron DeSantis, hopefully president January 2029, hopefully, fingers crossed that he runs again, my guy DeSantis. He commented and said, "Oh, good grief, come on now. That's it. That's really all you have to say to something like that." Senator Ted Cruz commented and said, "That's not what allegiance means." Clay Travis, founder of Outkick, mentioned, quote, "We only have 30 more years of this, guys." I mean, imagine that. These people are appointed for life, which, you know, might not be the worst thing in the world, but, like, we got 30 more years, at least, of this broad making some of the shakiest legal claims you've ever heard. Makes your jaw drop. Not sure if she's aware, but of all the countries to mention, Japan is probably the least helpful to her cause. Journalist Miranda Devine posted, quote, "Babies born in Japan can only become citizens if they have Japanese blood and are born to registered Japanese citizens whose names appear in a special book." I didn't know that. So this imaginary argument that's being made up by Justice Jackson here, suggesting that Japan is at all a good example of this. Terrible example. You should have used Canada, right? There are other countries out there with birthright citizenship that you could have used other than freaking Japan, who has pretty strict immigration laws, by the way. Same with Europe. All European countries actually have pretty strict immigration laws. We're being perfectly honest here. So, you know, here's the thing. There is a difference, as these commenters were saying, between respecting the laws of the country that you are a guest in when you're traveling, right? You're a guest in their country. And when you're an actual citizen of that country. Here in the United States, when you are a citizen here, you have certain privileges that non-citizens do not get. You get a passport in our country. You get to vote in our country. Right? You have certain legal protections in our country that non-citizens don't receive, right? Same with guests, right? When people come and visit here from Denmark, for example, we'll use Japan as an example. When people come and visit here from Japan, for example, right? They're a guest in our country. They have to follow our laws, right? Or we'll prosecute them here. And then we will deport them back to their country if that makes sense. That's what we're missing here, is the whole extradition, right? We send them back where they came from. So actually, you know, maybe the argument isn't that crazy after all. If you commit a crime in another country and we catch you, we should send you back to the country that you came from, right? Maybe it's not actually that bad of an argument, folks. Either way, you know, what really disappoints me so much is, here's the thing. Whenever you are a first of something, you know, the first black president, the first black female Supreme Court justice, the first female CEO, right? The first, you know, the first gay cabinet nominee, you know, cabinet position, right? All of these. Whenever you're a first of something, you automatically have more pressure put on you to do a good job. You automatically have more eyes on you to say the right things, to go about doing the right things. You have more pressure on you to perform because you're the first of that thing, right? There have been plenty of white straight males on the Supreme Court, for example. There's even been several women on the Supreme Court, for example. That's not a new thing, right? There haven't been that many black Supreme Court justices, and there's only been one black female Supreme Court justice. So, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson, she's got a lot of pressure on her, right? Because she's setting the standard for black female Supreme Court justices for the future to come until there's another one who comes along and she's no longer the first. By her spewing absolutely atrocious arguments, you are discrediting future black female Supreme Court justices. You know, there's the argument that came around when, you might remember, Elizabeth Holmes, who founded the company Theranos. This was this whole company that was basically wanting to run like 100 different blood tests on a single drop of blood. It was a huge startup. It came crashing down back in 2017. It was a huge disaster. She's sitting in a prison cell right now for defrauding investors of billions of dollars, essentially. You know, there was this whole perspective that came around that at the time, you know, Elizabeth Holmes was really one of the few women who was running a startup, right? One of the few women, you know, one of the first women, in fact, to have raised such an enormous amount of money and to be doing something what at the time was perceived to be so good for the world. So there was a lot of pressure on her to do the right things, to be the perfect example of what that thing should be and not screw up. And because she screwed up so royally, because she defrauded so many people, because she was an absolute crook, it ruined the market for other female entrepreneurs going forward trying to get venture capital at that time. Because Elizabeth Holmes was on the forefront of a whole bunch of people's minds, and people got very scared of investing money into female entrepreneurs at the time. And you can see why. It makes perfect sense, right? You know, you see you see one thing bad happen to one person, you assume that it might be an issue with a lot of other people, right? You get scared, right, when it's the first thing, right? I'll give you another example. Scott Bessent, current Treasury Secretary. He's the first ever gay man to hold that position. He's the first ever gay man in American history to be at the at that level in the United States government. Was he fifth in line to the presidency, right? This is the first. This is a first ever thing that's happened. You know, obviously we had Pete Buttigieg, you know, who is gay, right? Even Pete Buttigieg, right, to an extent. But nobody really cares about the transportation secretary all that much. Let's be perfectly honest here, folks. You don't really ever hear about transportation secretaries unless a plane crashes, right? As long as no disasters happen, you really don't hear about them all that much. But Treasury Secretary you hear quite a lot about. Quite a step up in terms of in terms of a position for Scott Bessent to have being Treasury Secretary. Anyways, I'm getting off track. So look at Scott Bessent, for example. He's the first ever gay man to be Treasury Secretary. He's the first ever gay man to be that close in line to the presidency. When do you ever hear about the man screwing up? When do you ever hear about some BS statement coming out of his mouth, right? You really don't. You really don't. One, because he's qualified, actually. And two, because he's a pretty smart person. And three, he probably knows in the back of his head that there is pressure on him to perform and to do a good job. Because he is the first of that position, right? He's the highest ranking gay man ever in United States history within our government, at least. So there's a certain amount of pressure to do good. Because if he screws up, there is going to be this general feeling in the air that gay men cannot do that position, right? I'm sure a lot of you have felt this if you've ever gone to a space where you're the first in that space, right? If you're a woman, for example, you know, you might have this sense that you have to perform in a certain area if it's largely male dominated, right? So maybe not so much nowadays. It's happening a lot more, but certainly back then, or at least in rare situations like this with things like the Supreme Court. My point in saying all of this is that Ketanji Brown Jackson, even if she was perfectly qualified for this job, which, to be clear, we know that she's not, is screwing up and completely discrediting future black female justices from coming on to the Supreme Court. There's going to be this air about them of, oh, the next time a black female justice gets nominated, oh, is this going to be another Ketanji Brown Jackson situation where she's an absolute idiot? This is a woman who's going around parading on Broadway, singing show tunes for a night, and she can't even come up with a good argument for birthright citizenship. There's so many better arguments you could make to keep birthright citizenship around than this one right here. The last thing I have to say is, we know she's not qualified. Joe Biden said himself, he said, quote, "I've been studying candidates' backgrounds and writing. I've made no decision." This was when we didn't know who was going to be replacing Stephen Breyer. I've made no decision except for one. He's only made one decision this time. The person that I nominate will be somebody with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity. That person will be the first black woman ever nominated to the United States Supreme Court. So here's what a reasonable person should get out of that statement, and why the actions of Ketanji Brown Jackson are so detrimental to future black justice. Because here's the thing: if you follow that logic, okay, so Joe Biden said that you could take this argument two ways. Number one, he's not looking at any other candidates other than a black woman for this position. So first off, that eliminates, I don't even know, a whole lot, a huge majority of justices who are far more qualified than this broad here. So you can look at that and say, well, we're already, not even considering a lot of really great candidates out there. But you can dig a little deeper, and he said, "I will nominate someone with extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity." So if we're to believe that Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first ever black female Supreme Court justice, has extraordinary qualifications, character, experience, and integrity, we're supposed to believe that she is the best black female judge who could have been picked at that time to fill that position. What does that say about black female judges here in the United States of America if Ketanji Brown Jackson is the best representation of them? Not a whole lot, in my opinion. And here's the thing. I'm pro getting people I'm pro diversity, right? I'm pro diversity. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm pro getting people who are actually qualified for that position onto bodies like this. If she was truly the most qualified person in the entire country for this position, she should have gotten the job. But she clearly was not, because you didn't even consider a lot of other people out there, Joe Biden. So all that to say, blame your senators, folks. Whatever senators out there, the Democrats, allowed for this to happen. The Senate should have put a pause on this and said, this is ridiculous. We can't just nominate a black woman to go on this body. Do not talk to literally anyone else. That's an aside, folks. I babble on. You know me. It's just, it brings me such deep sadness when I see things like this. Because it really is what I said, right? It really is setting the tone for people coming after her who are going to fill this position, right? Same thing with AOC, right? When AOC says BS stuff like that, it's like, are you kidding me? You're making a bad name for just women in general, honestly, in politics, when you act like an absolute buffoon. So, folks, if you disagree with me, let me know. But I just... It makes me sad when I see stuff like this, because I want all people to do better, and there are so many there's so many great people out there of all diversities, of all walks of life, who are great people. And when you have someone who represents them, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, or at least black women in this case, who represents them, not that she necessarily represents black women. Let's be real, right? There's an air that comes about. Maybe she's representing black female judges, right? Maybe we'll say that instead, right? Not that Scott Bessent represents my views or anything as a gay man, but following this line of logic, like I was saying, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, right? When future black female judges come along. So it makes me sad for our country when we see stuff like this. It makes me sad for democracy that we have people like this who are deciding how our laws are interpreted in our country. And it makes me so much more grateful that Donald Trump got 3 picks in his first term as president on the Supreme Court, and hopefully he might be getting maybe 1 or 2 more by the end of his second term, so he'll get 5 on there in total. That would be pretty astonishing. So with that, folks, let's go and move on to our next story. So Pam Bondi's back in the news, folks. So Pam Bondi got canned this week. Pam Bondi has been kicked out of her position. She's going to the private sector, folks. She's not sticking around the Department of Justice any longer. Trump gave her a really nice send off. So, well, let's kind of read through this article. So, President Donald Trump has removed Attorney General Pam Bondi from her post as America's top law enforcement officer. Trump praised her in a post on Truth Social, saying that she would be transitioning to a role in the private sector. That's Trump's code word for saying your disappointment. Let's be real. Bondi's time leading the Justice Department was often overshadowed by its handling of the release of the files relating to Jeffrey Epstein and its investigation into the convicted sex offender. Yes, totally. I've been saying on the show ever since I saw the way they were handling this whole situation. Honestly, it's just been disgusting, right? It's been a disaster, and anyone who knew anything. I mean, I'm not even an attorney, and I would have handled the situation better than she did. So we're not going to get into that right now, though. So she's the second Trump administration official in recent weeks to be cut from her post after Kristi Noem was ousted as Homeland Security Secretary in March. Bondi will be replaced by her former deputy, Todd Blanche. Now, we should point out, Todd Blanche, he's acting right now. He is not confirmed. There has not been a formal filling of this position. I don't believe that Todd Blanche is going to be sticking around long term as Attorney General, but we'll have to wait and see. So there's been kind of this air thrown about of if not Todd Blanche, who? So I've heard mention that maybe Lee Zeldin might be getting bumped up. I think he's the EPA director right now. I've heard a lot of people suggesting that maybe Ron DeSantis should be tapped. He's retiring in January. So that could be a great way of bringing a bulldog into a really major department within the United States. And it could also position DeSantis to be a great kind of springboard into the 2028 election. So I'm not sure about DeSantis. Not sure about Lee Zeldin. I don't know. I feel like Trump likes to pick people who are really sexy for a position, right? Have really nice name recognition. I don't think Lee Zeldin fits that role. I think DeSantis does a little bit more. I think he'd do a really good job. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Ron DeSantis. I would love for him to get a position in the federal government. I'd love for him to be president in the near future. But we'll see. I think DeSantis has a better shot than most, though, right? You look at some of the other nominees, right? Like Kristi Noem, right? She had that name recognition was very sexy, right? People knew who Kristi Noem is. She was at least a little qualified for the position. She had been a governor for quite a while. We mentioned that. She royally screwed it up, but we move on. And that's the thing that I really do love about the president is when people in his administration royally screw things up, he gets rid of them. And he brings in people who aren't going to screw it up in the future. The president does things as long as they work. And when they stop working, he changes course and does something different. And that's what I really like about Trump. I haven't seen that a whole lot in other presidencies, to be perfectly honest with you, at least within my lifetime. All right. So we had another little bit of history that was made the other day. We had a rocket launch. We are sending people, human beings, back to do a drive-by of the moon. They're going to do a little loop-de-loop around the moon, come back to Earth, and let us know what they saw. I like space. I get into space. I can't say I'm like the biggest space nerd out there, but I do appreciate that the United States is a country that is actively pursuing knowledge of the cosmos, sending people to the moon, establishing humanity on other planets. I think it's pretty awesome. I think it's pretty like American of us. When I think about things that are like super American, right? Baseball, apple pie, highways, right? So when I think of things that are super American, the suburbs, super American, another thing there. Sorry, my architecture knowledge is being flexed right there for a second. Put him back in the box. But when I think about something that really is truly American, I really do believe that space travel is one of them. Space travel is this massive feat of human intellect and knowledge to be able to send a human being on a rocket to the moon or to another planet, soon to be, hopefully sometime in the future. That is something really American to me. Wanting to go and be the best at we were the first country to ever land anyone on the moon. Being the best at getting people, we are the best in the world right now at space travel, right? We have the best satellites, we have the best equipment, we have the most robust agency, we have some of the smartest people in the world working on our space programs. I think that's great. There have been these calls in recent years to defund the space programs, to defund NASA and everything. NASA is such a small percent of the United States budget, but I feel that it does so much good just beyond spending money on things, right? It shows the world how dominant we are in fields like this, and other countries will never be there first. Europe, for example, there's a lot of smart people over in Europe. Europe can't even do the things that we're doing with one singular country, right? They have to all band together and be part of the European Space Agency, right? So anyways, I'm a big fan of space travel. I'm a big fan of NASA. I'd be fine if we wanted to give NASA more money, right? NASA can take whatever money they need to do their things. I'm all for it. Space travel, I think, is super amazing, awesome, and we need more of it. So Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, I saw this article by him, and it is entitled, "The Race to the Moon and Mars is Back, and this time freedom is on the line." So I wanted to read this article to you all, just kind of thinking about the what's happening right now with space travel in the world, and I thought it was an interesting article. So I'll begin. So a renewed commitment to the moon, Mars, and American leadership can define the next great era of national achievement. With President Trump and Jared Isaacman pointing the way, the United States has a chance to lead humanity beyond Earth once again. After decades of drift, America is finally preparing to reclaim its place at the forefront of space exploration. For the first time in 50 years, Americans are traveling to the moon and beyond. No one should underestimate the importance of this decision to venture into the solar system beyond near-Earth orbit. The recent announcements about the moon, Mars, and beyond by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman and the statements and executive orders of President Donald Trump are clear signs that America is back on track to carry freedom into space. This is an important, indeed vital shift from the policies of the last half century. America met President John F. Kennedy's challenge to go to the moon by the end of the 60s, with landings beginning in 1969 and continuing through 1972. Then the country sadly turned its back on the moon and settled into a focus on low Earth orbit for a variety of commercial, national security, and scientific activities. During that half century, we learned an amazing amount about how to operate close to Earth, and our lives are impacted every minute of every day by these activities. For example, you would not have a cell phone in your pocket were it not for our innovations in low Earth orbit. However, after the last American left the moon in 1972, we neglected to invest in that kind of program that would have maintained the momentum of the Apollo program. By the way, no country in the world did, invest in the moon. We were all looking at lower Earth orbit. In President Trump's first term, he indicated clearly how strongly he was committed to having America lead in space. He resurrected the National Space Council, and then Vice President Mike Pence did a great job bringing together every element of the space community. President Trump created a space force dedicated to developing American military superiority in space and across the planet. After a 4-year period of neglect under President Joe Biden, the second Trump administration focused once again on pioneering in space and growing commercial opportunities in low Earth orbit. By the way, I wouldn't necessarily say NASA was neglected under the Biden administration. I mean, of all the things that you could hate on the Biden administration for, I don't think one of them is necessarily abandoning NASA. That's all I'm going to say about that, though. By picking Isaacman to be the head of NASA, President Trump reached out into a unique and remarkable person. Isaacman had been a successful entrepreneur and was worth well over $1 billion. He was also passionate about space and had spent a considerable amount of time to fly into space twice as a customer of SpaceX. He's the only civilian who has completed a spacewalk outside the International Space Station. That's pretty amazing, by the way. Let's just be real here. Because Isaacman is a visionary and an entrepreneurial manager, he's already begun to create a new, dramatically more powerful set of goals for NASA, and recent briefing outlined a permanent return to the moon, the first voyages to pre-position equipment on Mars for human development, and the high priority of building a nuclear-powered rocket which will radically reduce travel time beyond the moon. These are big, decisive investments in moving freedom into the solar system. Artemis II will take 4 rockets further into space than anyone has ever gone before. Soon, its larger successor, SpaceX's Starship, will revolutionize travel beyond the Earth. As big as Artemis II is, a little more powerful than the huge Saturn rockets which carried our first manned space flights, it will be dwarfed by Starship. As a SpaceX customer, Isaacman understands the power of Elon Musk's determination to get things to work. The SpaceX development of reusable rockets collapsed the price of putting satellites into orbit by 90%. This was probably the biggest affordability breakthrough of the last generation. Today, about half of all launches in the world are SpaceX. Starship will be an even greater revolution. Starship will launch 100 passengers or 100 tons of cargo and will be usable repeatedly. The Artemis II launch was the wake-up call that America is back. This time, we are not just going to visit the moon. This time, we are going to develop the moon as usable property. We will learn how to get hydrogen out to the moon's ice caps, which have turned out to be surprisingly abundant. This hydrogen will help refuel and power other starships to Mars. This time, we are not just going to send clever robotic vehicles to the surface of Mars. We're going to land and begin to learn how to terraform and evolve Mars into a more hospitable, productive, and survivable environment. There was one seemingly mishap on the opening days of Artemis II, which, if looked at properly, is a sign of how far we've come. The toilet suddenly stopped working. Since it was a $30 million toilet, the first reaction was bad jokes and great skepticism. Then, as the theory came out, it was clear how far we had come in putting humans in space. Artemis II is the first vehicle going beyond lower Earth orbit to have a toilet. It is the first time astronauts have a private room. The challenges of relieving oneself in space are enormous. Think zero gravity, and your imagination will do the rest. The original true pioneers in the Apollo program had astonishingly primitive systems, and at times found it embarrassing. Nevertheless, the toilet is now fixed. The mission continues, and it's amazing how far we have come, and will go. As Isaacman warned us, the Chinese are aggressive and serious competitors. They will like to make territorialism the standard across the solar system. We are now on track to carry freedom everywhere, and Congress and the American people must rise to the occasion. The future is now, if we are prepared to grab it. I think it's a pretty amazing article by Newt Gingrich, let me say. It gives me chills thinking about it. I get very excited when I think about space. Would I ever go to space? Oh no, absolutely not. I am perfectly happy here on the planet Earth. I like my home here on Earth. I like my room. I'm okay with living here. I do not need to go to terraform Mars. I do not need to go live on the moon. I don't need to do any of that. That's not an experience that I need in my life. There are experiences that are out there that people do that I don't believe human beings need. One of them, I don't believe most people need to go to space. Or go cave diving. You've seen these cave divers Skydiving, another one of those. I think these are things that people really need to do. That's just me. I don't know. If you're someone who really feels strongly about doing it, go for it. I'm glad we have people who are willing to strap themselves to a missile and shoot up into the atmosphere and go look at the moon. They're up there right now, folks. I mean, if you go outside right now, go look at the moon. They're in a rocket right now. They're in a missile flying at the moon right now. They're up there right now. They're going. They're in space right now. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to think that there are human beings right now, human beings from Earth, up in space, not just on the International Space Station, but flying towards the moon at warp speed to go and travel around a little bit, to go and take a looky-loo. I think that's pretty extraordinary. So that's all we got for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know I did. We talked a while about the ridiculousness of the Supreme Court, particularly of Ketanji Brown Jackson. And we got to talk about space launches. Space launch is pretty awesome, right? I will truly be excited when we get a man on Mars. That'll be pretty extraordinary, right? Because it's like, the moon is like one thing, because the moon's not a planet, right? When we land a human being on another planet, that'll be pretty extraordinary, right? The fact that we have people smart enough to have figured out how to even do anything like that. Like, I don't think that, no matter how hard I study things, I don't think I could ever figure out how to do that, right? That's not my lane. I'm not that kind of scientist, right? So, but it's extraordinary to see that we have that, and to show just how awesome America is. So, folks, I hope you have a good Easter weekend. I hope you take some time to reflect upon what's happened this year thus far. We're almost halfway through the year. Midterms are coming up, all of that. And take some time and appreciate it. Go outside and touch some grass, but more importantly, go and look up the moon tonight and see if you can see a little rocket shooting up towards it. They're out there right now. It's pretty awesome. So with that, folks, I've been Nathan Hale. This has been the Nathan Hale Show. I will see you all again next week. And with that, I hope you have an amazing weekend, and hope to hear from you soon. Subscribe. Peace out. See ya. Bye.